Hey, so I'm making a video about my Wacom tablet is having some weird problem, and it started doing this recently. It's a 2100, it's the DTK, so it's the second generation 21UX, and it started flickering a little bit, and this is what it does. If you can see, it gets like blue pixelated lines that flicker across the screen, and it's super annoying. And I've been having problems with this forever, so after doing a bunch of research and not finding any answers, I opened it up and I found the solution. So it's an expensive machine, and if you have this problem, you can resolve it most likely doing this. Okay, so ultimately the source of the problem is the DVI connection. The 21UX uses a DVI cable, and my pins look fine. There's not a problem with the pins. I tested, I wheeled them around, and there doesn't seem to be an obvious problem with the cable from the outside. It could just be a matter of wear and breaking down in the shielding, and eventually you get some distortion. This unit came from a pretty high stress environment, so the cable probably saw quite a bit of wear. So what you'll have to do is open this thing up, and there's quite a few screws on the back. You don't need to get every single one of them off. The ones that you need are all of these outside just Phillips screws, and then additionally there are 6 on the inside. You don't need to remove this strain relief outlet. There's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These holes don't have any hardware, so just these 6. And then what happens is this piece comes off. Sorry for the poor lighting setup. It's first YouTube video, so I don't have any nice studio lights. So you take this thing off. There's nothing underneath that you need to worry about. And then what happens with this case is that there's molded snaps that hold this whole back plastic onto the front face. So it's a little tricky, but you just need to get under the seam and apply a little pressure, and they'll pop off. I've already pulled mine off, but there's 2 or 3 around the outside. You don't need to stick anything into the sides. You don't need to a flathead or anything. You can do it with just fingernails, and you just need to get the right angle of pressure, and the thing will pop. Don't yank on it too hard. I mean, the plastic's pretty tough, but you'll crack it if you're really, really aggressive. So then you need to feed this thing off your cable. Take it totally off and all the way to feed your cable through it. Get it out of the way, because you'll need to get pretty deep into this. I recommend dusting off the interior if you've got a bunch of dust accumulating. Alright, from here there's a bunch of screws you can see. Kind of the same thing, though. You don't need to remove all of them that you see. There's just specific ones that you need to get rid of, and that is these 2 that hold this cable in place. and then you'll need to get off. Hopefully you can see all of this. Only this one, and this one. These corners, all four corners, these two, and these two, and then these two in the front. The ones that are cut out, you don't need to get rid of, because they're actually holding the LCD package to the faceplate. So these two and these two can stay. So I'm going to do that. Alright, there'll be a little piece of protective tape probably holding this power switch, protecting this cable, so you just need to pull up some of that. Oh, that's right, there is one more. You don't need to unscrew this one. This is just another one of those that holds the LCD panel in place. So this thing will have a little bit of tension on it because it uses these soft kind of bushings, and that keeps the thing sealed. So you'll need to just give it a little pressure. Make sure these two cables on the outside don't get yanked. Let them feed through. You'll have this piece of protective tape. It's not very sticky. You can just pull that back, and same thing with this whole thing. This will come off. And you don't need to feed those cables through necessarily because there's a cutout on the bottom, so it just needs to, you just need to make sure you get around everything, and obviously be pretty careful. You can see how that just comes out through that slot. And dust it. So this is what I found kind of surprising when I got in here, was that it wasn't a direct wired connection. It's just a DVI cable running off of a PCB. It's like video board here. You don't need to get under any of this. You just need to unscrew this cable, which is nice. And pull this thing off. So with this solution that I've got worked out here, I wasn't worried about totally removing this thing or cutting anything off. There's enough room underneath the metal shield that this plug can stay here. It'll just kind of sit over here. But the real solution is replacing the cable. And what I just happened to have was a DVI to HDMI cable, and this is a DVI-D dual link cable. You can see it's full pin. It doesn't have the 4 pins around this wedge that the DVI-I single channel has. So you're going to have to look at your video card or your video output on your PC or your Mac to determine what is going to be compatible. The great thing about this video board, or this PCB here on the 21UX, is it's compatible with just about anything. So it's you can use DVI, you can use a new DVI which looks just like this, or a DVI dual channel or dual link, or a DVI-D. And I would just recommend DVI-D as it's the more modern technology. It's not going, you're not going to gain anything by it unless you were to, well, I'm not sure that you can even replace the panel in this to increase the resolution. I don't think the software or the hardware is mapped to, but you can use any of the 4 most common DVI cables, and you don't need to go DVI to HDMI. This is just what I happen to have, and again, going with the latest tech, I don't mind using HDMI since I'm not worried about audio or lag. So yeah, you just need to plug this thing in. And make sure that it's seated really well and totally tightened down with these tensioners. And then you're just going to have to feed this cable out in parallel with your original cable. So you're just reversing the process to install everything. So you just want to make sure when you reinstall this plate that you've got enough room underneath. So make sure that you set this thing up so it lays somewhere it's not going to press on something. There's quite a bit of room under this area. Just be conscious of that. It wasn't designed to necessarily be pressed up against stuff, so where it ends up, you need to make sure it's not crushing something. But there's plenty of room under there, so there shouldn't be any problem. Yeah. Make sure these little tabs go back on top. You just want to make sure that nothing is getting bit down here, and that all of these little bushings are clear. You want to watch this front cable too. This thing feeds through this little cutout, and the cable that runs to the power button goes in a slot that rests under this tab. So you can go ahead and cover this back up. Just stick it on. And what I did to help, because this is extra wire obviously coming through here, is I ran it alongside and underneath this cable. There's just enough room. If you use a DVI cable, which is thicker. You know, most of them are about this gauge, so quite a bit thicker, obviously. I think you should still have room to run parallel. Yeah, it's going to be tight, but you can do that. That shouldn't be a problem. So just feed it along with the original cable. And the way that the plastic shell sits on this, it sits flush against this piece. You see this piece here has some cutouts on it. You can see this. They sit on some raised metal tabs to keep this thing. It's just a strain relief design, so the cable doesn't pull vertically with use. So you want to make sure those sit on there. And you won't be able to just lay it across and get the plastic shell on. It'll be smashed in there. So what I did, and what, you know, one of the benefits of this thinner gauge wire is it takes up less space, obviously. So what I ended up doing was cutting some of this rubber away. You know, just taking a chunk carefully and digging out a channel for this to rest. And that just helps it so you're not pinching anything too hard. So if you're using a DVI, a full-size, fatter DVI cable, then you're going to need to dig a deeper trench. Or consider, I'm not sure what the alternative would be, maybe reshaping this bracket a little bit, but I think ideally you would just want to get rid of as much of this as you can and getting at least half or more of the full-size cable in below the top of this edge. So it'll take a little work, but you just don't want excess pressure on the outside shell. So from here we're just going to reinstall everything. Just starting with this cable so it's in its correct place. Oh my god, dangerous knife. And you can lay this tape just back over. Okay, so the trick with these bolts, if you notice, you'll notice, and I did this the first time, you'll notice that there's 2 holes on every one of these tabs. And only one of those holes is the right one for this metal bracket. The other hole is for the plastic shell. And the way to discern which hole you use for this metal bracket is there's a stamped ring around the hole that you are going to put the screw into the metal bracket, which is helpful. You just have to remember that that's the designation for the metal bracket, is the ring that's stamped on the outside of the appropriate hole. So that's how you do that. Also, these screws are obviously different than, you're not going to be able to see. They're just a tighter thread and shorter. These machine screws go on these 2 inside, and the longer screws, which there are more of, go around the perimeter. Alright, it's a good idea to double check all these connections. You haven't inadvertently lifted anything. Power connection and display settings connection. And then you just need to feed these wires back through your plastic panel. Inside to out, obviously. God, breaking everything. Oh, I screwed it all up. Yeah, noob. Okay. So before you go snapping this thing down, depending on how you routed your cable, just double check that your cable is sitting in that trench that you made. Otherwise, this area will, it's not gonna fit. So from here, you just need to snap everything down into place. Just with some firm pressure, kind of pressing towards the chassis. That seam will be flush if you've got it sitting correctly, so just make sure that it snaps all the way around. Awesome. All right. And yeah, you notice these cables come out through this anchor for your stand, obviously, so even though it looks like they're designed to run vertically, that's supposedly for your pen. I've never used that function. This thing needs to kind of go in on the corner and then pivot down. Of course, I did it perfect the first time, and now I can't do it. Oh, the pressure. Okay. And again, all these screws that came out are not identical, which I'm sure you noticed. The fatter machine screws go around the plate, in the center. Right. Now to test it. Well, that totally fixed it. Yeah, no lines, no flickering. And it's hard to describe unless you've seen it, and it varies in severity. At worst, it would be like, 75% of the picture totally covered in flickering blue pixels. And it was intermittent. It wasn't a constant thing, and as far as I could tell, it had nothing to do with heat. I couldn't really reproduce it. It was totally random, so as much as research as I've done, most of it pointed to a connectivity issue, and I mean that's what it turned out to be, thankfully. I wouldn't wish this on you if you had a Cintiq. I mean, I bought this thing secondhand, and the only reason I could afford it was because it had that issue. So this is just kind of a PSA for those of you who own a 21UX of either generation that have seen this problem or have this issue. That is likely your solution. You have to be a little bit brave to open one of these things up just based on their price point, but absolutely worth it for, a $10 cable and peace of mind. Oh, and just in case you're curious, this thing is really shiny because I have an acetate cover on it. That's something I have been experimenting with, because for the problems that this thing does have, the screen is like immaculate and perfect, and I'd like to keep it that way. So the best way that I've found to keep it safe and still workable is this fairly thick, I don't know if you can hear that, it's pretty thick. I don't know exactly how many microns, I forget, but if you go to like a Blick art store or just any art store, you can find some stuff of varying thickness, but it won't affect your performance at all. The pen glides on it really well. It's really smooth. I don't know, it's kind of like very glassy, but it's got a little bit of tack too. It's kind of nice, and you will never scratch your screen. I think the trick is just to mount it from the top and don't try and mount like the whole thing around along the sides. For one thing, that allows it to breathe, because that's, I think a lot of people are concerned about getting too much heat on the screen, because these things do get warm, but when it's just kind of loosely hanging, it won't affect your drawing. In fact, you may like avoid getting like weird bubbles just tacking one side. I mean, that's one benefit as well. So no real heat accumulation, and you know, a nice smooth drawing surface and no scratches. So if someday you sell your car in order to buy a new Cintiq, you can resell this one. So yeah, hopefully that helped somebody. I definitely wish I had found a video explaining exactly what my problem was, because this has been a nightmare for months. Yeah, if you have any other questions about troubleshooting your Cintiq or your 21UX, I might know a little bit about it. I've actually had the LCD panel off this thing, and I've been trying to deal with, I have one stuck pixel, and unfortunately everything I've tried up to this point has not been able to remove it. But you gotta cut your losses at some point. I mean, otherwise this thing's totally perfect for being 8 years old and worked pretty hard. So cool. First YouTube video. Hopefully there won't be cause for too many more. Alright. Good luck. Goodbye.